The black Mercedes glided through the rain-soaked streets of Geneva, reflecting the city's wealth and arrogance. Inside sat Margaret Hale, a powerful CEO known for her sharp tongue and colder heart. She barely looked at the man behind the wheel. To her, he was just another employee, invisible, replaceable. But fate was preparing a cruel reversal. In less than 24 hours, the same man she mocked for his accent would hold the key to saving her entire empire. One mistake, one meeting, and one driver fluent in 9 languages would change everything she thought she knew about power. Margaret Hale had built her empire through ruthless efficiency. She believed respect was earned through dominance, not decency. Her company, Hale International, stood on the verge of finalizing a $1 billion partnership with a powerful Middle Eastern conglomerate. The deal would define her legacy, and she wasn't about to let anyone jeopardize it. Her driver, David Okoro, was a quiet man in his mid-30s. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, always punctual, always composed. To Margaret, he was background noise, someone who belonged outside the frame of her world. She often corrected his pronunciation, rolled her eyes at his polite greetings, and once even told him, "You're lucky to be driving for people who matter." David absorbed every word without reaction. What she didn't know was that he held degrees in linguistics and business from 3 universities. He had fled political unrest in Nigeria, leaving behind an academic career and starting over as a driver to support his family. The morning of the Geneva meeting, tension filled the air. Margaret rehearsed her presentation, barking orders to her assistant and checking her reflection in the tinted glass. The deal required flawless communication, translation, negotiation, subtle diplomacy. When they arrived at the 5-star hotel, a sudden issue arose. The translation team hadn't arrived. The Arab delegates insisted on conducting the discussion in their native language to avoid misunderstandings. Margaret panicked, unable to follow their rapid exchange. Her empire hung by a thread, and for the first time in her life, control slipped from her grasp. The meeting began in chaos. The interpreters were stuck in traffic, and the delegates refused to proceed in English. Margaret tried to mask her frustration, forcing a tight smile while the conversation flowed around her in words she couldn't understand. Every minute felt like a countdown to disaster. David, waiting outside near the entrance, noticed her assistant pacing nervously. He overheard fragments of phone calls, panic about the missing translators and the collapsing deal. Without hesitation, he walked toward the conference room, stopping at the door, unsure if he should interfere. But then he remembered her words. "You're lucky to drive people who matter." He inhaled slowly and stepped inside. At first, the executives dismissed him. Margaret turned, her expression flickering between disbelief and irritation. "This isn't your place," she snapped. But before she could continue, David greeted the delegates fluently, in Arabic. The room froze. Then he shifted seamlessly into French, explaining the situation and offering to assist with translation until the interpreters arrived. Within seconds, tension dissolved. The delegates smiled, nodding with relief. David took a seat at the edge of the table, maintaining humble composure while guiding the conversation. Margaret sat motionless, the weight of realization settling on her. The man she had ignored now controlled the most crucial discussion of her career. Over the next 2 hours, David translated with precision and intelligence that transcended language itself. He bridged cultural nuances, clarified intentions, and even corrected a critical misinterpretation that would have cost Hale International millions. His voice was calm, confident, and deeply respected. As negotiations continued, something in Margaret shifted. For the first time, she wasn't leading. She was learning. Watching David command respect not through authority but through knowledge shattered her idea of hierarchy. When the delegates finally stood to shake hands, the head of the foreign conglomerate turned to David first. "Without you," he said through a smile, this partnership would have failed. Margaret's name was on the contract, but everyone in the room knew who had saved it. The next morning, headlines across business networks announced the billion-dollar partnership. Margaret received calls of congratulations from shareholders and politicians alike. Yet she couldn't ignore the dissonance inside her. The triumph didn't feel earned. David quietly prepared her car as usual, his professionalism unchanged. But when she stepped outside, she hesitated before entering. For the first time, she looked at him, truly looked. Inside the car, silence filled the air until Margaret finally spoke. "How many languages do you speak?" "9," he replied softly. "I studied them to help people understand each other. Sometimes, words are all we have." She turned toward the window, ashamed of her previous arrogance. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow behind the illusion of success. She had built her empire on intellect, but had forgotten the essence of humanity, respect. Later that evening at the company gala, Margaret publicly acknowledged David before her entire board. "This man reminded me that brilliance doesn't always wear a suit," she said. The audience applauded, but David simply bowed his head, uncomfortable with attention. That night, he returned home to his small apartment, where his children slept peacefully. His wife greeted him with a smile, unaware that he had just altered the fate of an empire. Margaret changed after that day. She restructured her company's hiring process, promoting diversity and merit over appearances. She launched a foundation to support skilled immigrants facing professional barriers, naming it after David. As for David, he continued driving for a while, not out of necessity but humility. He declined the corporate position Margaret offered, explaining that some lessons were more valuable than titles. He later opened a language institute in Geneva, teaching communication as a bridge between worlds. His philosophy was simple: the tongue reveals the heart. Margaret often attended his lectures, sitting quietly in the back. The woman who once judged others by status now listened to a man who taught the power of understanding. Years later, during an interview, she was asked what changed her most as a leader. She didn't mention profit margins or global deals, only a single sentence. "It was the day I met a man who spoke 9 languages, but taught me the meaning of silence." The camera lingered on her face, calm, reflective, transformed. The story of the arrogant CEO and her multilingual driver became more than a corporate legend. It became a mirror held up to a world that still measures worth by appearance. Because sometimes the people we underestimate aren't beneath us. They're simply waiting for the moment that reveals who truly understands the language of humanity.